Back in the early 90s, there was an absolutely horrific case in the metro Atlanta area. A lawyer hired a hitman to murder his wife. Blew her head off with a shotgun. But that's not even the worst part of it. It was all done in front of his and her 4- and 6-year-old sons. And now tragedy has struck those children again. Seema Iyer has the story.
Fred Tokars appeared to be the pillar of society.
He had been a prosecutor, then a defense attorney, and even a magistrate at one point. So he was a success story in Atlanta.
Tokars and his wife Sarah had 2 little boys, Ricky and Mike.
She loved being a mother and getting involved in her sons' lives at school.
In November of 1992, the young family suffered an unthinkable tragedy. A gunman ambushed them in their home, forced Sarah into her car, and after a short drive, killed her in what appeared to be a bungled robbery. The loss seemed to be felt by the entire city of Atlanta. But sorrow soon gave way to suspicion.
As it turns out, Fred Tokars was getting into some criminal conduct in the course of his business dealings with his partner, Eddie Lawrence. Sarah found out about his secret life, that is, his criminal life, and also there were women on the side, and was looking into divorcing him.
Fred Tokars became a suspect after police tracked down Sarah's killers.
What can you tell us about the murder of Sarah Tokars? Did Fred Tokars hire you to kill his wife?
Eddie Lawrence was a business associate of Tokars. He told police that Tokars wanted his wife killed. In exchange, he promised him a portion of his wife's insurance policy valued at nearly $2 million.
He was helping them set it up so that he would not be home, but it would happen at home.
Lawrence, in turn, hired this man, Curtis Rower, to do the job. Rower waited for Sarah to come home after visiting her family in Florida for Thanksgiving.
He called me and told me that I was going to get you some money.
I think someone who is alleged to have had his wife brutally murdered in front of their 2 children should be tried for murder.
Mr. Tokars, you have anything to say? No comment.
Tokars and his co-conspirators were tried separately.
No, I wasn't looking at it like that.
When Curtis Rower claimed at his trial that the shooting was an accident, prosecutors turned to the only witness they had to prove it wasn't. Ricky Tokars, just 6 years old at the time, was in the front passenger seat when his mother was shot to death. He described the exchange between his mom and who he called the bad man.
Don't try to with me.
Now, what did your mom say?
I'm not trying to with you.
Ricky went on to say the bad man shot his mother with a shotgun and ran away, leaving him and his brother alone with their mother's body.
I sort of seen if my mom was still awake or if she was dead, and then I woke my brother up and...
You woke your brother up?
Yeah, and then I told him we had to go get help, and then we went to go get help.
Ricky could not identify Curtis Rower as the gunman. And on cross, when the defense suggested he may not have remembered the incident clearly, the 8-year-old was unshakable.
You know, how you, the first time you hit a home run, like that, you, always remember that, don't you?
Yeah, it sticks out in your memory, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's, what it was when my mom...
Ricky's tear-filled testimony ended with a reassuring hug from his mother's family. He was ultimately spared the ordeal of testifying at his father's trial, but his trauma was not lost on the jury.
While the rest of the country was watching football games, my little nephew Ricky was standing in a pitch-dark observation room at the Cobb County Jail, trying to pick out his mother's murderer from a lineup.
While Tokars didn't pull the trigger in his wife's murder, his involvement was apparent in other ways.
One of the comments Mr. Tokars made was the crackheads weren't supposed to kill her in front of the kids.
After 5 weeks of trial, a day of reckoning.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Frederick William Tokars, guilty of malice murder.
Tokars was convicted of the most serious charge against him. Prosecutors wanted him put to death.
I expect the defense will talk to you a lot about can't do this to the children. That a sentence of death against this defendant somehow robs these children of a father. Well, the defendant forfeited that right as a parent when he ordered the death of these boys' mother.
It was the defendant's mother who pleaded with the jury.
Please don't kill my son. I beg you to spare my son's life. To lose my son, Fred, by the death penalty, I couldn't bear it.
A death sentence in Georgia had to be unanimous.
I mean, this evidence was there, the motive was there, the controlling behavior.
We, the jury, have found beyond a reasonable doubt that one or more of the alleged statutory aggravating circumstances do exist, and we recommend a life sentence to be imposed.
Relieved, Tokars turned to the gallery and sought the one person he could always count on, mouthing the word Mom, Mom, something his sons could no longer do.
Heart-wrenching, difficult. You're talking about a young boy having to testify at one of those trials. And now there's been more tragedy. Let's bring Seema in. Seema, there were two boys. They were 6 and 4 years old at the time of the murder. At the time of the trial, obviously a little bit older.
Yeah.
But the older son is the one who testified, and now something has happened to the younger son?
Yeah, I have some really sad news to report. The younger son, he was 4 at the time, Mike was only 31, and he's recently passed away. It's tragic, Vinny. He suffered from PTSD, from depression. I don't think he ever fully recovered mentally from what his father put him through.
Has Fred Tokars said anything since his son has passed away?
No, actually, Vinny, so I was very fortunate enough to speak to a very prominent journalist, Bill Torpy, and Bill has been following this case from when the murder occurred. In fact, the day after the murder, I think he saw Fred Tokars on his driveway when people just thought, oh gosh, this is a robbery gone bad. And so Bill Torpy, he had followed Fred Tokars for years, for decades. And what he uncovered is that Fred Tokars, part of his motivation was to repair his relationship with his sons, thought, I'll start doing some good while I'm in prison. I will help prosecutors. So, in essence, he became a snitch. And there are reports that he testified in somewhere between 3 and 6 murder trials for the prosecution. And because of that testimony, he was moved around to different federal facilities. He had a federal case and a state case. But at the time, and this was around 2012, I think, when Bill lost touch with Fred. And so he's in a location that nobody seems to know. We do think he's still alive, but no statement as to his son's death. Excuse me.
And Bill Torpy also gave us some insight into the life of Mike, who, as you said, was 31 at the time that he passed away just recently, and he was getting into journalism. Let's take a listen.
Yeah.
And in 2012, I got a message from one of the sisters, Chrissy, saying, hey, Mike wants to get into the business of journalism. He's a good writer. He's an engaging kid. He's a handsome kid. He's smart. I was doing a story on the 20th anniversary. And I talked, because I had never talked to the boys. They had never talked. And, of course, I didn't want to bother them when they were kids. And then finally I said, well, Mike, you want to be a writer. Why don't you write the story? And so he's like, yeah, that would be cool. So he wrote a story. He was kind of like his hero was Hunter Thompson, and he was a Jack Kerouac guy, and Charles Bukowski, and just the kind of like the drinking,
smoking,
fast living, smoking, writing guys. He was a good writer, and he wrote his piece. And later then he got into Columbia University in New York, one of the Ivy League schools.
So, Seema, how did his career develop from there? I guess the first thing he writes is about his own experience, his own life. He went to Columbia. I mean, that's top-notch journalism school.
Yeah, if not the best
of
in the
best.
country. Yeah, yeah. And he went on.
Yeah.
He went on to work. I think he wrote for the Christian Science Monitor. He wrote a few books, and he really had that lifestyle, Vinny, of that quintessential troubled writer.
I want to, Seema, thanks so much. This is a story that I know has touched the community in Georgia and Core TV viewers who may remember it from years and years ago. It was horrific, and more bad news tonight, unfortunately. Thanks so much.